Jimmy, if I had to harmonize the Bible with the book of First Enoch and the Bible, so if I had to harmonize those two sources, I would come to the same conclusion as mainstream and popular teaching does with the Nephilim. I think that's a hard task to harmonize those two. If I had that position, I would come to their same conclusion. But the fact of the matter is, I don't have to harmonize the Bible with external sources. I only have to harmonize the Bible with itself. And when I can determine what the Bible says in and of itself, then I can determine if external sources are even true to begin with.
Welcome everyone to this little study we're about to do. It's going to be a fun one. We've talked about it here and there, but today we thought, especially since we're actually recording this on Election Day, so we thought, man, while everything's going crazy, we might as well add a little fuel to it ourselves by talking about Genesis 6, the giants, the Nephilim, and how to properly interpret it based on like our very first video that we did about letting Scripture interpret itself. So, Ken, really good to see you, and I'm excited about this episode. I'm so glad you called me with some time. You're so busy.
Oh, it worked out. I had a couple things canceled today, and you were so gracious to squeeze this in. So thank you for doing that. Before we get started, I think it's going to be a really fun study. But as we're getting started, Jimmy, I want to kind of preface our study right off the bat by saying that it is my belief that, and this is how we have done Revelation and everything else that I'll ever teach, it's my belief that the Bible, the biblical data, is the sole source of authority. That doesn't mean that we can't look at other things. Obviously, you and I have referenced Josephus and some other things, but we don't reference those to interpret the Bible. We look at those as supplementary data. Specifically, when we believe the Bible is saying something, we'll look at other data, and when it matches the biblical data, then it helps the support for it. But I certainly don't have to harmonize, and I'll explain what I mean by that. I don't have to harmonize the biblical data with external sources. Meaning, if the biblical data says something that seems pretty clear, and an external source says something that's in conflict with it, I don't have to say, "Oh no, this historical data says this, but the Bible says this. How am I going to come up with a way to make both be true?" No, I don't have to do that. And that's as a Christian, as somebody who believes in what we've talked about so many times with biblical theology, I only have to harmonize the Bible within the biblical data. That's how we determine truth. So if I'm trying to understand something in Daniel, and there's a seemingly conflicting message in Matthew, then my job as a biblical theologian is to try and understand what Daniel was saying, understand what Matthew was saying, and say, if this is saying this, then is my conclusion compatible with what that was saying in Daniel? I only have to harmonize the Bible with itself. That's all I have. That's our task here. So I just wanted to say that on the outset of what we're saying, because I want people to understand, when you have people like Michael Heiser, and these guys are like him, for example, because he's pretty popular with this topic. He had his PhD, I believe it was a PhD. It was in ancient Semitic language.
Yeah.
And so he loved all the data from ancient Semitic language. And so when you go down that route and you see a lot of validity with the book, we talk about First Enoch. A lot of people use that for the study and would say, but it has to be true because doesn't Jude, and it's quoted in Jude and 2 Peter. And we'll get into all of that. Not in this video. I think that could be a good follow-up video to really examine the book of First Enoch. And we can do that. But I don't have to harmonize the Bible with that. I determine truth by the Bible. As a Christian, I use the New Testament to help interpret the Old, and I use the Bible to interpret itself. That's how we find truth. If there's some other text that's saying something contradictory to that, then we go with the Bible. So I am amazed, let me say the word amazed, at people that spend their time trying to harmonize the Bible with First Enoch. because they don't match. They're in contradiction to each other. But people that take their time to try and harmonize those are very creative. I don't have the patience for it because I don't have the capacity to care, I guess, what every historical book says. I'm a Bible guy. I care about the biblical text.
Uh-huh.
If Jimmy, let me just say this. If I were a person who thought I should have to harmonize First Enoch with the Bible, I would be scratching my head and come up with a theory, and I would probably agree with them on what these folks come up with fallen angels mating with humans, because you're kind of out of options when you think that's what First Enoch is saying. And then you look at the biblical text and it kind of looks like it at first glance. And all I have to do is make sons of God, angels, maybe fallen angels, that will fit in that text, and then just kind of come up with a theory. But what if for a second we had no preconceived idea?
Mm-hmm.
What if we had no interpretive lens? What if we took our glasses off and we had no lens to look through? No one told you anything. You just looked at the biblical data. That's what we're going to attempt to do in this study. And I think what you'll find is it's really, really simple. It's not very complicated at all. So that's kind of the background. And let's have some fun and dive in and talk through the biblical definition of the Nephilim. And I think folks will be thankful or happy to find out how simple this topic is. Although there is some complexity to it, I don't think it's as difficult as what other people are making it sound like. Okay. Got anything you want to add?
I'm like, good. I like simple. It works best for me.
It is simple. And we're going to do a long video you're like, why is it so long if it's simple? Well, there's a lot to it, but it is simple. First of all, Jimmy, let me talk about 3. We did our first video on 10 rules to interpret the Bible.
Yeah.
Those rules, we could make 15 of them. We could make 5 of them. They're just a way of getting your brain wrapped around the idea that the text is important. And we're going to have ideas of interpreting this text. We're going to do that in light of the grammar, in light of the history, the author's flow of thought. I've had people tell me that they don't need interpretive rules to interpret the Bible because they let the Holy Spirit guide them. And so when they're reading the Bible, the Holy Spirit just teaches them. They don't need interpretive rules like hermeneutics. They think that's a bad thing. And so when I talk to them, I say, do you always read English left to right and top to bottom? Do you pause it at a period and understand sentence breakdown? You're using interpretive rules. That's how language is created. So we're going to use these 3 basic interpretive rules for this study. Rule number 1 we're going to follow in this study is the New Testament interprets the Old Testament. This is basic Christianity. Basic Christianity is the New Testament interprets the Old Testament. For example, the idea of Jesus being the Lamb of God. When John the Baptist said, "Behold, the Lamb of God, which takes away the sins of the world." Well, what if I were to tell you that is a totally separate idea, and there he means lamb as something, and I could make up whatever I want. If I detach it from the Old Testament sacrificial system, then the idea of him being a lamb is lost. But why would I do that? It's part of the biblical narrative. Obviously, I go back and I understand the sacrificial system. I know the significance of a lamb in the sacrificial system, and this is God's sacrifice. I get that from Jesus is the metaphorical lamb that we see in the Old Testament. That's just how a Christian reads the Bible. Every Christian should read the Bible that way. Mm-hmm. You let the New Testament interpret and give you insight into what we were reading in the Old Testament. That's basic. Jimmy, could you read for us Luke 24:27?
And beginning at Moses and all the prophets, he expounded unto them in all the scripture the things concerning himself.
So this is the story of Jesus on the road to Emmaus. He meets the 2. And that text says that Jesus was explaining who he was. And what does he do? He opens up, he sees the law, Moses and the law, and the prophets. And he explains it to them. And it says he explained it to them about all things concerning himself. The Old Testament is about Jesus.
Yeah.
And everything we're reading points to him. This whole story is about the redemption of mankind. And so, yes, as a Christian, I can read the New Testament and interpret the Old. Now, there are some people that know this topic pretty well, and they're already saying, "Oh no, Ken, you cannot do that because this idea of the sons of God in Hebrew is unique." What? Let me just ask people. Okay, so you want to, Ben Elohim. So you want to be able to have this rule. First of all, where is that rule in the Bible that I cannot take a sister word in Greek and have insight on it from my Hebrew word? And also, what other word do we do that with? Is there
Well,
any other study that we can think of that you study in Hebrew and somebody says, "Oh, that's stuck in Hebrew. You can't take it over to the Greek"? I've never even heard of that argument.
mm, well,
So
but
who
then
made that rule up?
we do have the Septuagint, right?
Right?
That
Sure.
is Greek, where they actually Hebrew scholars use Greek words, and they go between the two, right? Because they're looking at the Hebrew text, and
Well, not just Hebrew scholars, but the King James translators did that.
yeah,
I have people that I talk to that are King James onlyists, Jimmy, and they say they don't believe in the Septuagint. And I say, you don't believe in the book of Genesis? And they always say, what are you talking about? Of course I do. Genesis is not a Hebrew word. Why is it called Genesis in your King James Bible? It's called Genesis because the King James translators got that name from the Septuagint.
mm,
Passed down. And
right.
so there's a lot of Septuagint fingerprints all over the Old Testament.
And
So
wasn't
anyway,
it
that's just
and wasn't it compiled? Was it like a couple hundred years before Christ was born?
250 approximately 250
Yeah.
years. Yeah.
So
So
you
and
know,
it's the one that Jesus and the apostles
I,
quoted, and that's according to the King James translators.
I was going to
So
say a lot of people might be shocked to know that that's actually probably the scriptures that the disciples were reading from.
it's the
Was the
one they quote
Septuagint.
from. So if you're looking at your King James and they quote in the New Testament, go over and look and read, and it doesn't match. Most of the time it's off, and that's because your Old Testament is the Masoretic text in the Hebrew. Boy, we are rabbit trailing. New Testament is different. So but if you look up their quotations and then go look it up in the LXX, it will match. So that's how you know what they're quoting. But
Right.
anyway, so the rule number one is for a Christian is we let the New Testament interpret the Old Testament. Rule number two we're going to follow, and this is very simple, is the clear passages interpret the unclear passages. Some stuff in the Bible is done with visions, some parables, some are just worded in a really strange way that's hard to understand. And we're like, I have to shelf this. I'm not sure what this passage means. Until you read a really clear passage, you go, oh, that's what it means. Okay, so the clear passages interpret the unclear. I think everybody should agree on that.
Mm-hmm.
Number three, and I've already said this, we must harmonize the Bible with itself and not other texts. So you can go look at other texts, but make sure you understand your claim of truth by the scriptures themselves, and then you can go out and look at other. But we don't look at others and hold them on the same plane as the Bible and say, okay, how do I make these two? They don't agree, so I'm going to make them. That's what the Mormons do that with the Book of Mormon and the Bible. They believe they're both authoritative. So if you point out that there's a difference between them, then they have to try and harmonize them rather than just look at the Book of Mormon and say, yeah, this doesn't match the Bible. What's my sole source of faith and practice? It's the Bible. So I'm going, so the Book of Mormon must be wrong. No, they try to harmonize it. And the way they do that is they come up with a systematic theology that fills in the gaps and bridges the two. But that, as a Christian, Jimmy, we just don't have to do that. We harmonize the Bible with itself, and that's how we determine truth. Very simple.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's dive in.
All right.
I'm going to try to make this simple, organized as much as possible. But let me just say this. If one is using the Bible alone to gain their understanding of truth, I think the identity of the Nephilim becomes actually very, very simple. But the problem is, Jimmy, I'm never going to be popular. I'm never going to be famous. You know why? Because I just want to keep pointing back to the Bible, and anybody can do that. It's big business to sell fear. It's very, very popular to scare people.
And
It's also popular.
How many times the Bible say to fear not?
Fear not. Yep, don't fear. And it's popular to fearmonger. It's big business. It's also popular for people to think that you're smarter than you are and you figured out something and they need to follow you because you have it figured out based on mysterious ancient ways that only you have access to. That's pride. So you're going to see the answer is pretty simple to this. So let's just do this. Let's look at the passage in question and let's see how they take it. and then we'll start breaking down, I think, what the Bible is saying. So let's go to Genesis 6. And I'll just kind of read through just a couple of verses here because, and also here's the crazy part, Jimmy. When you hear this taught by those, and by the way, let me just throw out a term, and I don't mean this to be, I don't mean this. I don't know what to call their theory, so I'm just going to call it this, but I don't mean it to be mean or crude or rude or anything like that. But I'm going to call their theory. The theory is that the fallen angels have come down and mated with women and created a half breed of human demon. That's what the popular theory is of the Nephilim. Mm-hmm. So I'm just going to, for the sake of us just all being on the same page, I'm going to call that the ET theory. It's extraterrestrial. A terrestrial is a human, so extra is human plus. So okay. Rather than call it a half breed, I'll just call it an ET. But I don't mean that to make fun of them, although it is a pretty sci-fi. They do have a sci-fi view, so it's like at some point we have to acknowledge that this is mythology. But I'll call it a ET view.
I never watched that movie yet.
Oh, really? You're the last one. I'm just kidding.
I tell you, man, my dad wouldn't let me watch movies growing up, and I missed them.
Oh, really?
I missed a bunch of those, and then I got older, and I'm like, I don't really care. I didn't either.
Didn't really miss out. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Okay, so this is the ET view. But when you hear the ET view taught, you hear it mostly taught from Genesis chapter 6, and what they do is they go to verse number 4. And they teach that verse. And Jimmy, their focus is this big. I call that bullet point theology. Mm-hmm. They focus on something like this, and they totally ignore the author's flow of thought. They ignore the context of the whole passage and what's trying to be said. But here's what it is. Let's read it and talk about it. So there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. Okay, so I'm going to do my best to represent their view. If somebody watching thinks I didn't do it well enough, then go ahead and state it, because I want to be fair and I want to say it exactly how they would. I grew up believing this, and so I don't necessarily have anything against those that believe it. But here's the view. The view is that that these giants, the word giants there is the word Nephilim in the Hebrew. It's actually not Nephilim there. It's actually Nephal, but that's the root word that we would get Nephilim from, is the word giants.
Because I am added to a Hebrew word as plural, right?
Is that right? I'm not sure.
If there's a I am on a lot of Hebrew words, that just makes it plural.
That makes it plural?
That's like putting an S on
it. Very good. Okay,
wait a minute. That's good to know. Wait a minute. I didn't tell you something you didn't know.
You did, man.
What?
Yeah, you did. See, that's why you're on here. You're not just a cool dude in a cool hat. There's more going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really spend
with a cool wife that made my hat.
That's right. I try to spend most of my time on Greek. I had to make a decision. I stopped studying Hebrew a couple years ago, and I'm all Greek because I could only do one at a time. So I started really forgetting a lot of Hebrew. So I forgot all the little simple stuff so far.
That'll be your secondary PhD, because as soon as you get this PhD, I got a feeling you're going to miss all this schooling so much.
Oh, I just love it so much.
You just got to go back and do it again.
Right. Yeah, that's going to be so fun. But here's the ET theory. The theory is that there's fallen angels that came down, and they mated with human women, and their offspring produced giants that we would call Nephilim. And these giants were amazing fighters. They were their bloodline was tainted, and eventually the Lord had to bring the flood to try and get rid of this line. But Satan, go ahead.
Here's how I understood it too.
Tell me.
I was kind of deep into this for a while. But there was actually 200 called the Watchers. They were 200 special angels that were the Watchers, and they're the ones that left their place and went down with the women. And then the Nephilim the Nephilim were the offspring, like you said. But then when the Nephilim died, because they weren't human or fully angelic, their spirit lived on outside of their body, and that those spirits is now what most people think demons are today. Like, so demons didn't necessarily exist until all these Nephilim bodies died off
Right.
and their spirits lived on. That's what I was taught.
Sure. And that 200 watchers part, that's straight from First Enoch.
Yes.
So we'll get into that in another follow-up video. We'll do a focus on First Enoch, and we'll talk about that. So that's basically what I would refer to as the ET view, extraterrestrial view, that there's a half-breed going on. And basically they go to this. Now, this phrase, the Ben Elohim, the sons of God, is also talked about in Job 1, Job 2, and Job 38. And other than that, that's all you got. And so in those passages, and we're going to look at that in this video, those passages, since the followers of this theory already have their mind made up from Genesis 6:4, Job 1, 2, and 38, there's really not much study to go along. They just say, and those are also angels. And so it's just already built into the view. There's not a lot of study. But I'm going to show you in our study today, if you use the Bible, that I think it's actually different than that. Okay. Now we begin our Bible study. And we're going to come back to Genesis 6, and we're going to actually start at Genesis 1. We're going to actually take context into this thing and look at it. But here's our Bible study, okay? So as a Christian, I'm going to reserve the right of one of our rules of I'm going to let the New Testament interpret the Old Testament. I hope everybody's okay with that. Those that have the ET view will not appreciate me doing this. They're going to say, you can't do this. But my friends, why? What rule is there in the Bible that I cannot use the New Testament to interpret the Old? I mean, this is basic Christianity. So let's do it. Romans chapter 8 and verse 14.
For as many as are led by the Spirit of God, they are the sons of God.
So we're starting to build our definition of the sons of God in the Bible. And so far, Paul has said it very clearly. If you're led by the Spirit of God, you're a son of God, or you're the son. These are the sons of God. These are people that are in covenant. These are human beings that are in covenant with God, and they have a relationship with him. The word sons is a relationship. Son denotes the idea of father. So there's a father-son relationship here, and we are in that relationship covenantally if we're led by the Spirit. Let's go to John chapter 1 and verse 12.
But as many as received him, to them gave he power to become the sons of God, even to them that believe on his name.
So now we have how you become one of the sons of God. And Jesus came, according to John, Jesus came to offer himself ransom for many. And we have the opportunity to believe on him. By belief, we can become one of the sons of God. Paul says it this way: if you're led by the Spirit, which is those that believe in him, it's all the same idea. So Jesus said it that way, John records it that way, and Paul records it that same way, that these are people who are in covenant with God, and he's giving them power to become in relationship with him in covenant. Pretty simple so far. Philippians chapter 2 and verse 15.
That ye may be blameless and harmless, the sons of God, without rebuke, in the midst of a crooked and perverse nation, among whom ye shine as lights in the world.
Paul clearly is speaking to believers here, and he's clearly just talking about them being in covenant with him, and he's talking about them being referred to as the sons of God. 1 John chapter 3 and verse 1.
Beloved, now are we the sons of God, and it doth not yet appear what we shall be. But we know that, when he shall appear, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is.
So now in 1 John, we have another record here that these are human beings that are in covenant with God. Now, here's the thing. When you follow this back to the Old Testament, it's just a theming. This is just a definition theming. See, the thing is, to be covenantally, relationally, to have God as your father and to be in his family, there was the sacrificial system and faith. Remember Romans chapter 4, verse 1 about, we talk about Romans chapter 4, what has Abraham found according to his flesh? Remember, it says, for he believed God and it was counted to him for righteousness. I mean, that's Abraham. That's before Moses. Mm-hmm. And so people had covenantal relationships with the Father before Jesus. But now that Jesus has come, he's giving people power to become the sons of God, covenantally, relationship with him. I mean, this is basic Christianity. I'm not saying anything mind-blowing here at all. All right, so maybe some people might be saying, okay, but wait a second, it can't be that easy. So did we just establish what sons of God was according to the Bible? Well, I can tell you this. Jesus did not come to give us power to become fallen angels. You're not a fallen angel if you're led by the Spirit of God. Okay, so as a Christian, can we really just read the New Testament to gain understanding of the Old Testament? Well, yes, it is that simple. But what I would like to do in this video is to say, okay, let's just try this hat on for size. You know, when we're doing a Bible study, I've tried to articulate their position. I know they would want to bring in a lot more sources and make their case more. But I've tried to articulate their position the best that I can. But let's just hypothetically say, hey, maybe we're wrong. Maybe let's just try this out. Could it work that this is simply people that are in covenant with God? Could that even work in the text? I mean, if it doesn't, it doesn't. We're not going to force it. But let's just try this on for size. Okay, let's go a little deeper. Let's go to Hebrews chapter 1 and verses 4 through 7, because we really haven't talked about angels yet. Now let's talk about angels. We've already talked about the phrase sons of God. But let's talk about angels. Hebrews chapter 1, verses 4 through 7.
Being made so much better than the angels, as he hath by inheritance obtained a more excellent name than they. For unto which of the angels said he at any time, Thou art my son, this day have I begotten thee? And again, I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son. And again, when he bringeth in the first begotten into the world, he saith, And let all the angels of God worship him. And of the angels he saith, Who maketh his angels spirits, and his ministers a flame of fire.
Jimmy, it's my understanding that those that hold to the ET view, they are saying that God called fallen angels sons of God.
Yeah.
Okay. The writer of Hebrews here, through the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, I believe, he says this in verse 5. Unto which of the angels said he at any time? That's retroactive, obviously. Any time is any time. Did he ever say, Thou art my son? This day have I begotten thee. And again, I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son.
Could he have just been talking like as in relation to Jesus? Like he called Jesus his son, like singular, you are my son. I mean, could the writer be somehow trying to portray that like we know the angel Michael, we see, could he have been the son, called a son? You know, does that make sense what I'm trying to say?
Well, I think you're actually making the point. You're making the point because he didn't call any of them son.
Right.
The reason Jesus is unique is because he's the Son of God. And so yes, so basically, and I totally appreciate your thought there. But if you have a group of people or a group of anything, if the group of people are the sons of God as a collective group in a plural, then one of them plucked out of that would be a son of God. And so that's actually the writer of Hebrews' point, is none of the angels were ever called a son of God.
Right.
There's only one. So Jesus is unique in that. So he's never at any time ever called any of them a son of God, or collectively more than that.
Yeah, or let
God.
alone a whole group of them sons of God.
Exactly. That's even more to the negative in that sense, because you'd have a multiplicity of people breaking that rule. Because one of the angels could say, "Who are you?" You'd say, "I'm one of the sons of God. I am a son of God," singular, plural, sons of God. But then it also says another interesting thing here in verse 7. It talks about the angels. It says that they're spirits. That'll come in handy later for this study. They're not physical, they're spirits. There's two different ideas of this. There's physical and there's material and immaterial. The angels are spirits. They're not trying to find pants at Walmart right now. Okay, so they're spirits. So if the sons of God is not referring to angels at any time, then how should we interpret Genesis 6? So this is my understanding of how to do Bible study. If we want to understand Genesis 6, we don't just look at Genesis 6, 1 through 4. That's not the context. The context is Genesis 1 through 5. So we need to take the time to go to Genesis 1 through 5. So imagine that, Jimmy. We're using the author's flow of thought to understand what they were thinking. I'm not just going to pull, if you think this video is me pulling some New Testament verses and saying, look at the definition, aha, we're going to reverse everything you've been taught about Genesis. No, we're going to look at the actual text. I'm just laying groundwork here as a Christian that I'm allowed to look at the New Testament to get a definition to that I can use throughout the Bible. But let's go ahead and go to Genesis chapter 1. Now, I'm just going to kind of talk through this because, we're not going to look at the whole text. We'll be here forever. But I think I'll just use generalities. Genesis 1 and 2 is simply about this. God created all things, including mankind. So he then placed Adam, and this is important for our study. Adam is a Hebrew word that simply is interpreted as man. We would pronounce it Adam in Hebrew. So the word Adam in Hebrew just simply means man. So he placed Adam, the man, and Eve in a garden because a garden reflects the character of God. You're in a garden that is replicated through a seed. The seed is seemingly dead. It goes into the ground, which seems like it would bury it. That's where you put dead things. But through the process of growth, that will produce another tree, and on that tree, if it's healthy, will produce fruit, and inside that fruit is another seed, and the process replicates itself. So God was teaching his creative works, his power over death, and all of his attributes inside of this garden. If something's unhealthy in the nutrients and there's not enough nutrients or water or sunlight, then something's going to go wrong in the garden. And that is all spiritual. There's a fruit theme through the Bible. Israel is called the vine. Then Jesus comes and says, you only produce sour grapes, wild olives tree, and that kind of thing. He comes forth and says, now I'm the true vine. He curses the fig tree. Fruit will never grow on them again. Jesus, in a sense, becomes the grape of heaven. He becomes the fruit that Israel could never produce. Jesus was pressed into the wine press of God's wrath, and out of him, his skin is broken, and out of him comes his blood. He even says this for the new covenant, take this cup, for in it is my blood. The New Testament, this wine is my blood. It's this imagery in Revelation where he's wearing a linen pure cloth, but from the bottom of it is like it's stained in red from his own blood. And the Bible talks about him, stepping on these grapes in the wine press of the wrath of God. So we have this massive theming and imagery in the Bible. So that's Genesis chapter 1 and 2. So we get to Genesis 3 and we find out that this prized possession of God, this Adam, has fallen to the serpent. And behold, in Genesis chapter 3, the entire point of the Bible is set forth for the reader. In fact, Jimmy, not many people recognize this, but you have half of the biblical timeline is in Genesis 1 through 11. You have 2,000 years in Genesis 1 through 11. And in Genesis 12 through Revelation 22, you have the other 2,000 years.
I remember you said that on your Matthew series at your church. I think it was in chapter 21. It was so cool how you set that up. Like, there's 4,000 years there in the Old Testament covered, and then there's only 40 years covered in the New Testament. So it's a lot more packed in there.
Yep. You have 100 times more time in the Old Testament than you do the New Testament. And so you're watching something on fast forward. And it's really on fast forward in Genesis 1 through 11. There's the first 2,000 years. The second 2,000 years is the rest of the Old Testament, and it slows down to just 40 years are left in the New Testament. When you're reading the Gospels, they only cover 3 years. If you don't take his birth and the mention of him being 12, but the majority of it is just 3 years. And those 3 years are up in the case of Matthew. Those are up at the end of chapter 20. And then you're going in from Matthew 21 through 28 is only a week. It's the last week we call the Passion Week. And so, you're seeing in the Old Testament highlights of the highlights of the highlights. You're watching something in fast forward. Why is that? It's important to know that, because when we're getting to Jesus, it's like somebody really slows down time. Now, all of a sudden, you've got a big book that's covering 3 years, and the first 2/3 is covering 3 years, and the last third is a week. Wow. Why is that? Now we're going in slow motion, because his death, burial, and resurrection is the point of the whole thing. And so as it slows down, that's what we've been reading about. So when we get to Genesis chapter 3.
And I loved how you gave the analogy of, or you just talked about the differences when people said, well, God in the old covenant was so angry and fighting all the time, and
Right.
Jesus comes along and it's all love and stuff. And tell us again, tell these listeners that didn't see your Matthew episode, because that was so cool how you said that.
Sure, man. Yeah, I think it's a really good point, because you hear a lot of people say that the character of God seems different from the Old Covenant or Old Testament to the New, that you see a very vengeful, wrathful God in the Old Testament, and in the New you see this love, everything's forgiveness. It's really not like that. In reality, you have 4,000 years to choose from in the Old Testament, and we're highlighting all the times that God gave his wrath. And so when you have 4,000 years condensed down to these 39 books, you're seeing the highlights of both wrath and grace. You see both of them, but we say, wow, look at what he did to the Chaldeans. Look what he did to the Jebusites and so forth. And it seems like he's so harsh. Things are so tough. But remember, when we get to the New Testament, it's only covering. There's only 40 years to choose from. Acts covers about maybe 37 years, and the Gospels are about 3. So you're only at 40 years in the New Testament, and there's less to pick from. But we still see things like Ananias and Sapphira. Remember, they lied about the money. They wanted to look a little better than they wanted to, be able to write off on their taxes a little bit more than whatever the case was. They wanted to look better. And boy, remember what Peter said? I mean, the person that walked out with your husband's here to carry you out also. It's like, man, that doesn't sound, that's pretty vengeful.
Right.
But we see in the Old Testament, we see, Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. We see, so you do have both elements. It's just that you have 4,000 years and 1/100th of the time, 40 years in the New Testament. So you're zooming in and you're hitting slow motion when we get to the story of Christ. And because people don't pick up on that, they're reading, 10 chapters in the New Testament and 10 chapters in the Old Testament. And to them, it just seems like, wow, he's way more vengeful in the Old than he is in the New. I'm thankful for his grace, but his grace has been around since Genesis. And he was very, very forgiving to people.
He gave his people almost 4,000 years to get it right.
That's right. That's right. That's pretty patient. So Genesis 3:15 is super, super important. Genesis 3:15 is the first prophecy in the Bible. People remember that, Adam fell willingly, Eve was deceived. And so let's go ahead and go to Genesis 3:15, Jimmy, because Genesis 3:15 sets the narrative for the rest of the Bible. It is the point of the Bible, actually. So Genesis 3:15 is major importance. Let's go ahead and read that.
And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed, and it shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel.
This is the first prophecy given in the Bible, and it sets the tone for the rest of the biblical narrative. Here you have two people that do not have seed. Eve doesn't have seed, and Satan doesn't have seed. But yet God is saying, I'm going to put a separation between your seed. So first of all, that's kind of an interesting way of saying it. But what's the point of this? Well, we have to understand that the seed of the woman, as we see talked about throughout the Bible, the seed of the woman will be Jesus. So he is the seed of the woman that's being talked about there. Who's the seed of the serpent? Well, we have a few clues on that. We'll read this throughout our text here. But one clue we have is in John 8:44. Remember when Jesus is talking to the Pharisees, and they said, Abraham's our father, and Jesus makes a distinction. He says, you may be, how does he say it? You may be children of Abraham, offspring of Abraham. He makes it a very physical term, but he said, but he's not your father. You may be children, but he's not your father, something like that. He says, you are of your father, the devil. So this is a spiritual seed.
I have it here if you want me to read
And
it.
yeah, go ahead. So I'm butchering it.
Ye are of your father, the devil, and the lust of your father ye will do. He was a murderer from the beginning, and abode not in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaketh a lie, he speaketh of his own, for he is a liar and the father of it.
He says in verse 37, I know that you are Abraham's seed. That's a very physical, and that's the important part of seed here. Seed just means line. I know you're of Abraham's seed, but he says this in verse 37, but ye seek to kill me because my word hath no place in you. I speak that which I have seen with my father, notice the relationship, and you do that which you've seen of your father. And they answered him and said, Our father Abraham is our father. Jesus said to them, now this is the point, verse 39, if ye were Abraham's children, you would do the works of Abraham. So he's making a distinction between seed and children. In other words, Ancestry.com places you in the lineage of Abraham. Oh, but you're not children of Abraham.
Mm.
In other words, you're not in covenantal relationship with Abraham. That would be kind of saying sons of Abraham would be a way of saying you're in covenant relationship like Abraham was. Sons of God means you're in covenant relationship with God. Oh, you're of his seed, but you're not his children. Different. So this is a study about the seed line of Satan and Eve. And God says in Genesis 3:15, I'm going to put enmity. That word means division, a separation. There is going to be a clear separation going through the timeline and the chronology of history where Jesus is going to be born and he's going to crush Satan's head. That's what this is talking about. It says, there is Jesus. It's kind of worded funny in the Hebrew, but that it is actually Jesus. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. In other words, the imagery there is that this one that's coming from the seed line of Eve is going to step on your head. It might bruise the bottom of his foot, but he's going to give you a death blow to your skull. He's going to crush you with his foot. When Jesus was on the cross, he certainly got a bruised foot. In other words, he got a wound which was healed in the resurrection. It was temporary, but the death blow that Satan received is permanent. It was a loss at the cross for him that will result in the total destruction of his kingdom, and those that follow him will not experience life everlasting. So this is setting up the biblical narrative. Okay, let's go to Genesis 4. So in Genesis 4, I just want to point out two verses that's going to help us with our context here. Chapter 4 and verse number 1. Adam knew Eve. I think we all know that's a euphemism. It doesn't mean they were, talking. To know Eve means that she got pregnant. But look at what it says here. It's such funny wording, Jimmy. Who would say this? Genesis 4:1, and Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bare Cain. And here's what she said. Have you ever heard a new mom say this? I have gotten a man from the Lord. Well, that's odd, isn't it? I got a man from the Lord. Now remember what man means. The Hebrew word there is Adam, or we would say Adam. So she just said, I got another Adam. Now, maybe the person listening to this might think, well, maybe that's just how they talked back then. Okay, well, let's go down and look at verse number 25. Now, in the middle of this, Cain kills Abel. Now, author's flow of thought. Satan knows that the godly line of Eve is going to crush him. There's only probably 4 people on the planet that we know of, and one of them kills somebody. There's all this land you can choose from. There's no taxes. I mean, there's no communism. There's no bad people. There's 4 people on the planet. Like, move somewhere if you don't like your brother. Why did he kill him? Well, obviously, Satan possessed him, and he greatly influenced him to kill him. Why did he want to? Because of Genesis 3:15. Satan is waiting for the godly line of Eve to crush his skull. And so when he sees that Abel's sacrifice is accepted and Cain is not, Cain is filled with rage, mouths off to God. What am I, my brother's keeper? and he kills his brother. That's odd. There's 4 people. That's weird. One of them, 25% of the world is a murderer. That's weird.
Mm.
So that happens in between here. But look at this in verse number 25. And Adam knew his wife, and she bare a son. She bare a son and called his name Seth. So in verse number 1, Jimmy, when Cain was born, she said, I got a man. But here when Seth is born, she said, I got a son. Okay, let's go back to our thinking of Genesis 3:15. There's going to be a line from Eve, and of her seed there's going to be then a separation, and then it will crush the seed of the serpent.
Mm-hmm.
We have 2 lines here. So one of those lines is now called man, which is another word for Adam, and one of those is called son, which is a covenantal term.
Mm.
Good to know.
Yeah.
Now let's go forward to Genesis chapter 5. Genesis chapter 5 is the genealogical record, or if I could say it this way for the sake of our study, is the record of seed. And we're going to start with Adam, the first man, Adam. So we're going to start with Adam, and we're going to go all the way down through Noah and his 3 sons. Shem, Ham, and Japheth is how we end this in verse number 32. Why is that important? Because we're looking for the seed of Eve to crush the serpent. So we're following a seed line. We're following the seed line. The reason chapter 5 is in there, and you see this several times in Genesis, and look at First Chronicles, what is it? The first 9 or 11 chapters of First Chronicles is all, and he begat, and he begat, and he begat. It's the chronology, it's the chronicles of the chronology of Israel. It's the seed record, because we need to follow the seed of Eve and the godly line of Eve, because somebody from that line is going to crush the serpent. And so just for our viewers to know, we end up with Noah, and it's going to be through Shem that Jesus comes. So we're going to follow now the line of Shem. If you ever get a 1611 King James Bible, an actual facsimile, the real, what the translators did, man, you look and see how much work they did showing the genealogies in the first, they probably have, 20 pages or so of just genealogies they do with these little circles like you would a family tree. You can follow all this down. It's absolutely amazing if you've seen that. But through the line of Shem is where our hero Jesus is going to come from. So Genesis 5 is the record of the seed line, so that we don't lose point of Genesis 3:15. Okay, now let's get to Genesis 6. Now that we know the author's flow of thought and we know what's going on, Genesis 6 is getting ready to get the readers to see the flood narrative from Genesis 6 through 9. Genesis 6 through 9 very generally is covering the flood, and we're going to see that we're going to start this thing over with Noah, his wife, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, his 3 sons, and their wives. We're going to start the seed line over. That's why Genesis 5 is important how it ends, so that you know that Shem is of the line of Seth because of the prophecy in Genesis 3:15. Because when we hit a reset button and the world's population is done, it's very good for the reader to know that Genesis 3:15 is still intact because Shem is from Seth. We're following it.
Right.
Okay, so let's look at this. In verse number 1, it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them. Okay, let's go slow here. Now, what do we know from verse number 1? First of all, I'll just point this out. Notice that it was men who were multiplying. And when men were multiplying, they had daughters that were born to them. So far, here's what we have. We have people that are making more people. Not very difficult so far, specifically with the name men. So men are multiplying, and onto them, daughters were born. I don't think anybody would find this too difficult. So far, we have people making more people. Let's look at verse number 2. It says that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they did. So here's the question, Jimmy. Is sons of God here? Is this an angel? Well, if you're a Bible-believing Christian, you can erase that option. Why? Because Hebrews 1:5 says that at any time, it was not at any time that God called any of the angels a son of God. Well, I believe the Bible, so I can erase that option. Also, but look what we have in this verse. We have a distinction being made between sons and men. The author has already told us that there's a distinction between sons and men. When Cain was born, Eve told the reader, I've been given a man from the Lord. When Seth was born, she said, I've been given a son. So we already have two categories from Cain and Abel based on chapter 4.
So is that saying that sons of Seth saw the daughters of Cain?
That's how I take it.
Okay.
That's the author's flow of thought. Remember, we want to separate. There's going to be enmity between you and the serpent, Genesis 3:15. And so this verse right here, setting up the flood, is saying that was in violation. In other words, this separation that was supposed to be there is now not being there because it was the daughters of, let's go ahead and read it. The sons of God, sons of God, that's a covenantal term based on everything we've already read in the New Testament. Jesus came to give us power to become sons of God, to be in covenant with him. So can I read it this way? Those that are in covenant with God, they saw the daughters of Cain, the daughters of Adam, men. That's the word.
So,
and by the way,
women have always been the problem.
Oh my goodness, Jimmy. What's your address? Where can the mail go? P.O. Box. Ladies and gentlemen, it's at JIMIVISION, P.O. Box, something, Tennessee.
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding, kind of, mostly.
Kind of, mostly. Sarah, I don't know who this guy is. But yeah, so, and also, just if you take a second and consider what's being argued here in Genesis 6, this is no different, folks, from exactly what Paul's arguing. Remember Paul's argument that you're either in Adam, and in Adam all die, or you're in Christ, where all are made alive. So Paul's argument is no different than it's the same classification in Paul's argumentation for salvation as it is here. You're either in Adam, man. That's why I'm not just trying to teach people a Hebrew word. I want them to know that Adam means man. And if you're in Adam, you die. In other words, if you're not regenerate or you're not in covenant with God, right, you'll die. So here's the distinction. The sons of God, those in covenant, they saw that the daughters of those not in covenant, that they were fair and to look upon, and they took them for wives. In other words, Genesis 3:15 separation was now starting to commingle. Problem, because we need a separation for Messiah to come. Okay? Verse number 3, and the Lord said, my spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he is also flesh. His days shall be 120. That's talking about counting down to the flood. Okay, so
I used to think we were guaranteed 120 years. I claim that all the time.
Yeah, a lot of people read that and say that. That's just counting down how long they had until the flood.
Yeah.
But notice the physical terms here in verse 3. Remember what we're talking about. Let's not lose sight of it. Are the sons of God fallen angels? Is the ET theory viable according to the text? Well, my goodness, Jimmy, we're almost to verse 4, which is the creme de la creme. This is the pinnacle of their teaching. And so far, you know what we have? God saying, my spirit will not always strive with man. Why? According to verse 4, it's Satan's fault. It's the demon's fault. So, but my goodness, so far what we have in verse number 1, we have people multiplying with other people. Then we have a certain people group looking at another people group and wanting to marry them. And then we have the reminder that people will only live this long and God's spirit will only be with people for this long. Author's flow of thought. Do you see now why they start with verse 4?
Context,
it's wildly out of context. Okay, verse number 4 says this, and this is the funniest part. I shouldn't say funny because I don't want to mock anybody, but here's the most ironic part of this whole thing. Let's read verse number 4 super slow. There were, and I'll just say Nephilim, because that's where we're getting that word. There were Nephilim in the earth in those days. In what days? Well, in the days that verses 1, 2, and 3 happened. In the days that the sons of God saw the daughters of men were fair and they took them for wives. In those days, the author is saying, there were Nephilim in the earth in those days. Okay, that's a statement of historical fact. He's letting you know. Okay. But look what it says. And also after that. After what? After the sons of God saw the daughters of men were fair, and there were Nephilim in the earth in those days. And after that, okay? Now, whatever comes next in the sentence, the after that part, we'll call that the B part of the sentence. And after that, something's going to happen. We'll call that B. So in A, we find out that there were giants in the earth in those days. A. And then after A happens, B happens. Okay? It's almost too simple, but I don't want to go past this. Look what it says. And also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men, which were of old mighty men of renown. Now, people want us to believe with the ET theory that it's the commingling of the fallen angels with humans that produce these mighty giants. Problem, it says here that there were giants or Nephilim in the earth in those days. So they're already established on the earth.
So before this supposedly happened, there were already giants in the land.
They're already there.
Yeah.
They're already there. And then after they were there, after that, then something happened. What happened? Well, after that, the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The offspring question happened after the Nephilim were already on the earth. You just got to read it slow enough to see it. Now, let's go a step further. What exactly was produced? And I'm going to give a challenge to all of our viewers to take a second, pause the video, open your Bible to Genesis 6:4. Here's my question to you. What was produced by the sons of God going in onto the daughters of men? Leave out the adjectives, just give me the noun.
Men.
So we have here, yes. It tells you what they were.
Mm.
The answer is right there. The offspring of the sons of God going into the daughters of men, you know what they produced? People. So in Genesis 6:4, you have people mating with people, producing people. It's actually in the verse. So you have to have a preconceived idea and read into the text something else. And somebody has to tell you a definition from an external source. That's not biblical theology. That's not a Bible study. That's trying to harmonize the Bible with an external source. This has two glaringly huge, obvious errors for the ET view. One is that the Nephilim were already on the earth before this event took place. The second thing is, even after it took place, it tells you what they produced. They produced men. Now, they were mighty men, but that doesn't mean they weren't men. That's just an adjective. They were apparently good at fighting. And we'll break that down in a little bit. Let's go to verse 5. Now, verse 5, here's another part of the ET view, is they state the reason for the flood, and Jimmy, you can chime in on this because you're more versed in it, but the purpose for the flood, according to ET view, correct me if I'm wrong, is to try and get rid of the Nephilim line. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. I was told that everybody's blood was corrupted with half angel blood by now, and even the animals, and it was just hard to find anything clean, animal or human wise. So in order to preserve the line, God had to kill everything off and start over with the only guy who was left with pure blood still. The only family.
Right. So obviously, if we look at the Word of God, and we can actually get the purpose for the flood right here. Verses 5 through 7 tell us. It says, and God saw that the wickedness of, and I would just ask everybody to look and see what's the next word. God saw the wickedness of what? Man.
Man.
Was great in the earth, and that every imagination and the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. It repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. And the Lord said, I will destroy man from whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast and creeping things and the fowls of the air, for it repented me that I have made them. And then, of course, thank goodness for the next verse, because this is why you and I are even here right now, that Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. And we're going to find that the Genesis 3:15 prophecy is intact because of Noah's faithfulness. Noah wasn't perfect. He just found grace. He just found grace.
Hmm.
He's a sinner who found grace through humility and believing God. And it was because of that he had a covenantal relationship with the Lord. But my goodness, let's suppose, okay, this is, let's do a little plug and play here. Let's suppose the ET theory is true. Let's go back and read verse 4 and assume that the ET theory is true. There were Nephilim, there were half-breed fallen angels, demons, and in the earth in those days. And also, let's forget also after that part. Also after that, when the fallen angels came into the daughters of men, they bare to them a hybrid mighty army. Okay, so who's at fault there? Satan's at fault. The fallen angels are at fault. Boy, you know why they don't really read past that verse, Jimmy? Because verses 5 through 7 are expressing God's wrath and anger on men. Well, what did men do?
Yeah.
Why would it grieve God's heart that he made man?
Yeah.
I mean, you have women mating with demons. The women are giving themselves over to demons. The men are the only group of his creation that were innocent, that didn't do anything, according to the text. I'm saying hypothetically, if you read this as the ET view,
Right.
5 through 7 make no sense.
You know what else doesn't
So again,
make sense?
author's flow of thought.
You know what else doesn't make sense? And I'm jumping ahead to after the flood, because there was also Nephilim after the flood. Because
well, yeah.
You know what I mean? Because that's scripturally. It talks about Nimrod and all these giants in the land, like this cedars of Lebanon and all this stuff. So it has to mean something different.
And it blows my mind that people use that text for this, because you have 12 spies that go out in the land. Remember the story? I said this to our church and people didn't know what I meant. But remember, there's an old children's song that goes, 10 were bad and 2 were good. Somebody watching will know that. What did they see when they got to Canaan? 10 were bad and 2 were good. Some saw giants big and strong. Some saw grapes of clusters long. Nobody knows that? Do you know that?
I've never heard
some
that.
Saw God.
Keep going.
Yeah, some say God was in it all. 10 were bad and 2 were good. Joshua and Caleb were the 2 good ones. It was the 10 that were scared. It was the 10 that were not the faithful spies. They came back. It was the testimony of the 10 who were not faithful to God. Their testimony was, we are but grasshoppers in their sight. Joshua and Caleb, the 2 godly ones, they said, what are you talking about? This land is ours for the taking. So I can't believe that the proponents of the ET view would use the 10's testimony. Shocking. It disproves them. Wouldn't you want to use the testimony of the faithful? I don't understand how they use that as a point for their doctrine.
It said we were like grasshoppers in their sight.
Yeah.
And so that just gives you the imagery of like being very small to very big,
Yeah. Yeah. Ungodly people don't think very well of the Lord. The 2 faithful ones said, the land is ours. Different perspectives, maybe, because 2 were faithful to the Lord.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about putting this on a court of law. It's the 10 that were ungodly that said, we don't stand a chance against those guys. The 2 faithful said, we got this. What are you talking about? So verses 5 through 7 in context are blaming the wickedness of men on the flood. The ET view violates that principle. It's the wickedness of men. for the reason for the flood. That's in the Bible. If you have any other reason, it's extra biblical. It's from a different text, and you're inserting that. That is called eisegesis. You're bringing an outside thought into the text. I'm only here to harmonize the Bible with itself. This is a Bible study. I do biblical theology. I am a Bible teacher. I don't harmonize it with any other history books. Okay. In another video, we can get into the first book of Enoch and talk about that. So what do we have here? We have the godly line of Seth, and they were marrying into the ungodly line of Cain. I have gotten a man from the Lord. I got a son from the Lord. So you have the sons of Seth and the men from Cain were starting to intermarry the daughters of men. The sons of Seth were starting to marry the daughters of Cain. So what we have here is God had to put a stop to this, and quickly, because we're looking for the coming of the Messiah to be the Redeemer of the world. And it's going to go through the line of Shem. And so God in his grace waits till the last second, till there's only one faithful family left. I mean, talk about cutting it close. There's only one faithful family left, but Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. And so the Messiah could then be born through the line of Shem. And when he's born, he's going to crush the head of the serpent on the cross as he gets his foot bruised, but he is healed from that bruise as the resurrection happened. Noah wasn't perfect, but he did find grace in the eyes of God, and God used him to save the world because the Messiah came through Shem. Okay, so let's move on from I think that's enough right there where people could say the biblical data doesn't even come close to supporting that, but we have more Bible to look at. Let's look at this ET view a little bit more and what it's really claiming. What they are claiming with the ET view is that angels can mate with humans. They are saying that they have a DNA that can mix with humans in a way that's helpful. I don't know if anybody knows about nucleotides, but check out a nucleotide. If somebody says we're only 2 to 3% different from chimpanzees, in the world of nucleotides, 2 to 3% is death times a million. You could never bridge the gap of that. It's only a few nucleotides to be able to get to mentally handicapped. You talk about 2 to 3% DNA, it's millions and millions of nucleotides. So we're saying that a spirit, we already read that in Hebrews, angels are spirits. They're ministering spirits. We have no evidence that they have any ability at all to procreate. We don't know that they have the parts, the desire. The Bible says the opposite. It says that they are spirits. But let's look and see what Jesus has to say about this. Let's go to Matthew chapter 22 and verses 29 and 30. There's a group of people that are trying to trip up Jesus while you're turning there, Jimmy. They're trying to trip up Jesus. And they ask him, hey, remember this story? There's a, I can't remember, it was a man that had 7 wives or vice versa. And he said, which one's his wife in the resurrection?
It was a wife who married a man and he died.
7, okay.
And each brother,
okay, yeah, so 7 men to 1 wife. Is that what it is?
Yeah.
And he says, which one is his wife in the resurrection or whatever? So here's what Jesus says to that.
Jesus answered and said unto them, Ye do err, not knowing the Scriptures, nor the power of God. For in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are as the angels of God in heaven.
So in that verse right there, Jesus is seemingly saying that the angels don't have the ability to marry, maybe, or the desire. It's not part of his plan for them to marry at all. And so in the resurrection, we're going to be like the angels in this sense, that we won't be married to each other. So there's some information. The angels aren't even intended to be married. So here we have in the ET theory, all of a sudden they can do it. So God has given them eternal desires to mate, an eternal sexual frustration. Is that the view? I don't think that's biblical.
Yeah.
I don't think that's biblical. I don't think they have the ability to. I don't think they can do that. They're a spirit. Spirits aren't physical. Like I said, they're not shopping for pants. This is not what we're viewing in the scriptures. Jesus says in the resurrection, we're not given to marriage, and he uses the angels as an example. Let's go ahead and go to Luke chapter 20, verses 34 through 36.
And Jesus answering said unto them, The children of this world marry, and are given in marriage. But they which shall be accounted worthy to obtain that world and the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage. Neither can they die any more, for they are equal unto the angels, and are the children of God, being the children of the resurrection.
Again, you have that phrase, children of God, because you're part of the resurrection. And one of the similarities you have with angels is, again, you're not married. You don't have that ability. Let's read Hebrews chapter 1, 13 and 14.
But to which of the angels said he at any time, Sit on my right hand until I make thine enemies thy footstool? Are they not all ministering spirits, sent forth to minister for them who shall be heirs of salvation?
And notice the word all is in there in Hebrews chapter 1:14. Are they not all spirits? Ministering is the description of what kind of spirits. Are they not all spirits? Of course they are, is the answer. It's a rhetorical question. Are they not all spirits? Yes, they are. In other words, I can say this. All angels are spirits. They're non-physical. They don't get married to each other. The ET view has them all of a sudden having DNA close enough to barely manipulate, and also, can I say this, not just manipulate the DNA of a human being, but enhance, bigger, stronger, better. So Satan is improving on God's creation. This is not biblical. This is mythology.
Well, what about
what
about some that would say, well, angels manifested into physical form?
And that would be the key. They manifested. But they are spirits.
They're still spirits, but they manifested.
Right. Remember, yep. Now remember when we see Jesus cast out the demons, because we're talking about fallen angels, which, by the way, I'm really skipping some biblical principles here, because we should do a study on angels sometime and fallen, and demons, because we're really assuming a bunch. When even in this discussion, I'm kind of assuming a bunch just to have the discussion, because really the Bible says very little about what, we talk about demons. Who are they? There's no biblical proof that those are fallen angels. We're guessing that. Right. The only terminology we have in that is when it says in Jude they left their first estate, that there were some angels that left their first estate. But to think those are the demons like Legion, that's an assumption. But anyway, remember when Jesus casts out the demons? Is it the Gennesaret? Is it that passage, I believe? And remember they said, we're Legion, for we are many, and they begged him. What did they beg him to do? Cast us into the pigs.
Yeah. Don't send. Yeah. So begged him not to send them to the abyss before their time, or something like that.
Yeah. And the abyss is the word deep, because that water was there, and they don't have any choice. Remember that theming from Genesis we've talked about in our Revelation study, that deep water, the Hebrews were terrified of that deep water. That's the abyss talked about in Revelation that the dragon is thrown in. That bottomless pit idea is the ocean theming. Mm-hmm. And so, ironically, Jesus said, okay, you can go into the pigs, because they wanted to be clothed with flesh. Why? Because they don't have any. And so once they were clothed with the flesh, what did God do? Ironically, put the pigs in the water. Is kind of, and basically that was two birds, one stone, because those were people that were in the business of dealing pork, which was a violation of the old covenant. And so two birds, one stone. You guys are going into the abyss. Take these pigs with you. That's ill-gotten gain from those that aren't even in covenant with me. So kind of 2 for 1 there. Okay, let's go ahead and continue our study, and let's go ahead and tackle the portion in the book of Job. So, Jimmy, last time we presented this material, I had said that the book of Job does mention sons of God as being angels. I think I said that in our last video together. Mm-hmm. That's because I hadn't studied it too much, and I need to let people know that I've changed my mind on that after looking at it more. The principle that we've read in Romans, and the principle that we've read that simply states in Romans 8:14, John 1:12, Philippians 2:15, John 1:3, 1 John 3:1, 1 John 3:2. That's just to name some. We could even go on. Those principles, I believe, are airtight. I believe that it's talking about the phrase sons of God as those in covenant with him. And I believe that's true throughout the whole Bible. So I had to re-examine Job and consider it without having a bias, and to read it just as the text presents it. And I came to a lot of the same conclusions as I did in Genesis by following the author's flow of thought. So let's look at the author's flow of thought in Job and look at these different mentions of sons of God and see if it makes sense. So let's go ahead and first examine Job chapter 1, because we see the phrase being used here in verse number 6. So let's work our way up to that and look at the author's flow of thought again. Jim, if you don't mind, I'll just kind of sketch this out for us. In verse number 1, the writer says, there was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. That man was perfect and upright, one that feared God and eschewed evil. The word eschewed kind of means to despise evil even before it makes its way to you. It's a premeditation of righteousness before the evil comes to your doorstep. It's really stating the fact that Job cared about righteousness. That's why it talks about him. He's a perfect man. He fears God. This is pivotal for our understanding of the story of Job. And there was born unto him 7 sons and 3 daughters. So you have a guy that is in covenant with the Lord. He loves the Lord. He fears God. And he has 10 children, 7 sons, 3 daughters. His substance also was 7,000 sheep. And it goes through all of these things that he owns. Verse number 4, his sons went and feasted in their houses, every one his day, and sent and called for their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. And it was so, when the days of their feasting were gone, that Job sent and sanctified them. Let's pause for a moment. Who is the them? The them is the sons of Job. So it was so that when the days of there is the sons of Job, when their feasting were gone about, then Job sanctified them. That's his sons, his 7 sons. So he rose up early in the morning. So how did he sanctify them? Remember, this is Job it's not in order in your Bible chronologically. But the book of Job is contemporary with Genesis. This is way before Abraham. And so it says here, this is how he sanctified them. Job sent and sanctified them, rose up early in the morning, offered burnt offering according to the number of them all. For Job said, it may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts, and thus did Job continually. So we see in verse number 5 that Job loved his kids so much, Jimmy, that he prayed for them. Imagine that. A godly father who loves his kids, he prays for his kids. In the same way that you and I would pray for God's protection over our children, Job feared God, eschewed evil, a man of righteousness, and he made sacrifices on behalf of his kids that sins they may not even be aware of. That's how much he loved them. And so he was basically the high priest at this time, if you want to say that. He was the mediator of his family, the patriarch Job, and he is going out in the morning and he is offered burnt offerings according to the number of them. In other words, for each one of his sons, he did this. And his reasoning was, it may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. I want to make sure they're protected from God's wrath. I care about them. So Job goes out and he does a sacrificial ceremony to cleanse the sins of his sons. Now we get to verse 6. Now there was a day when the sons of God. What did we say the sons of God was this whole time? Those in covenant with him. Verse number 5 shows that Job made sacrifices on their behalf. What happens when a sacrifice is made on your behalf? You get in a relationship with God. So verse number 6 starts with, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. Why can't I take that as those in covenant with God? That's how it's used everywhere else in the Bible. Here we have the whole point of this so far is there's a righteous man who made sacrifices for his sons. So it says here, verse 6, that there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them. Kind of a strange way of saying it. And the Lord said unto Satan, whence comest thou? And King James here, where'd you come from? And Jimmy, isn't that really the question? Where is this happening? Is this in heaven? Because if it's in heaven, then it's not Job's kids that are going in. This is not Job's children, sons that are walking around in heaven.
Right.
But God asked Satan, where'd you just come from? And did you know Satan gives us the answer? Then Satan answered the Lord in verse number 7. He said, from going to and fro in the earth and from walking up and down in it. Where'd you come? I'm just walking around on the earth. Jimmy, this took place on the earth. The sons of God are the people in covenant with God. So here's what's happening, I think. I think you have, and by the way, all I need to do for the sake of our study is to make this just plausible. You can disagree with me. All I have to do is present this, and by the way, I will promise you, nobody with the ET view is starting at Job 1:1 and doing context like I am.
Yeah.
They just go right to verse 6 and say, see, Satan's with them. This is heaven. No, wait a second. There's a righteous man who makes a sacrifice for his sons. Then the words sons of God are used, and they're used to present themselves before the Lord. And the weird part is Satan came with them, and God's like, well, where'd you come from? He's like, oh, walking up and down on the earth, to and fro, walking up and down on the earth.
Well,
that is significant.
Not only just that, but it reads like they were partying with their sisters.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not going to be going on in heaven either.
Well, sure, but the ones that would be the proponents of the ET view say there's a break in verse number 6, and it's a totally different. See, that's
they're saying there's a break.
Yes.
Okay.
In my opinion, a lot of bad teaching has invisible lines in the text where they cross stuff out and say, before this line, this, and after this line, this, like Revelation 3 and 4. The rapture is between those two.
Oh, and the gap in the 69th and 70th week.
Gap in the 69th, 70th week, and I'll throw one else out there that I believe is false. That's the gap theory between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2.
Yeah.
It's not there, but it's a nice theory that people like to build on. So yes, they put a gap between 5 and 6. That's the only way they can get it to work. And that's why I'm doing context, because the context of verses 1 through 5 destroy their case. And then, so you have, I'm glad you said that. So folks, if you look at your Bible in Job 1 through 5, everyone agrees that that's taking place on the earth. I've never heard anybody say that's not taking place on the earth. And then you have in verses 7 and 8, you have the earth mentioned. Where were you? In the earth. Well, have you considered my servant Job? There's none like him in the earth. So earth is the context of 7 and 8. So earth is the context 1 through 5 and 7 and 8. Nobody would disagree with that I'm aware of. So doesn't it make sense that 6, the beginning of the paragraph, is actually a worship service where those that are now in covenant with God, the sons of Job, are presenting themselves before the Lord, and Satan walks in among them. Where have you been, walking to and fro on the earth? Look what else it says in verse number 9. Then Satan answered the Lord and said, doth Job fear God for naught or for nothing? Hast not thou made a hedge about him, about his house, physical term, earth term, and about all that he hath on every side? Thou hast blessed the work of his hands, work, physical, earth term. His substance is increased in the land, but put forth thine hand now and touch all that he had, and he will curse you to your face. Now look at this. And the Lord said unto Satan, behold, all that he hath is in thy power, only upon himself put not forth thine hand. So Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord. That phrase, the presence of the Lord, is an interesting one. A lot of times when you are on the earth, that's a tabernacle phrase. That's why I wanted to go slow there. When you're talking about the tabernacle, people are before the presence of the Lord. I wouldn't push this point too hard, but when you have some examples in Revelation, when you have people are actually before God, it says they stood before the Lord. Both small and great stood before the Lord. It just says they stood before the Lord. But when we have this tabernacle idea in the Holy of Holies, it's the idea of the presence of the Lord. Moses was before the presence of the Lord. But when you see him face to face in some visions, you're standing before the Lord. When Paul says both small and great will stand before the Lord. Here they're before the presence of the Lord. I wouldn't push that point too hard, but I do think that it's interesting. Okay, Let's move on. The next time we see this is in Job chapter 2. And we see it again in Job chapter 2 in verses 1 and 2. Again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. So I think that is those that are in covenant going into a worship time or some sort of a time. This is the reason I'm sketchy on is because it wasn't explained to us.
Right.
But this is way before Moses. This is before Aaron. So whatever they were doing, it was some sort of a worship service before the Lord. And Satan came also among them to present himself before the Lord. Can you believe it? God is helping us this much with this study. He says in verse 2, where'd you come from? Whence camest thou? Satan answered, and he said exactly where he was. Where'd you come from? He said, from going to and fro in the earth and walking up and down in it. So we have the exact same wording. Both times are connected to the earth. And by the way, when it says he goes out from the presence of the Lord to go and tempt Job, it just almost kind of seems like he walks out the back door. He's not traveling from heaven, trekking down to the earth. I don't think anybody that's of the ET view believes that Satan is omnipresent. I don't think they believe that he can instantaneously appear somewhere. He doesn't have those kind of powers. So when you take this, I think it's pretty straightforward.
So is God coming down on the earth then to be in the presence of the? I mean,
well, God's omnipresent.
Right.
So when he was in the burning bush with Moses, he's standing before the presence of the Lord.
Right.
That's what I was saying about that phrase, presence of the Lord.
Right.
It's like he can manifest himself in the Holy of Holies. That's the presence of the Lord. But in Revelation, or when Paul's talking about the judgment, he's talking about the judgment, he says phrases like, and they stood before the Lord. Not the presence of the Lord. They stood before the Lord. But in these instances, the presence seems to be a part of the earth where he's specifically put his presence in, like the Holy of Holies, and like the believer in the New Testament, where our bodies become the temple. We house the presence of the Lord.
Satan has taken on another, I don't know. In my mind, he's with these scriptures, he seems to just be another created guy with a job that God has given him or something. It doesn't. He gets portrayed as almost co-equal with God, and they're always battling, and they're one's trying to beat the other. Satan sounds totally subservient, and he's just got a job to do.
Yep. And his job is Genesis 3:15. He's trying to make sure that the seed of Eve, which he is following, does not come to fruition, so that his head doesn't get crushed.
Yeah.
That's the whole point of the Bible. That's why Herod starts killing little babies. This is why Moses had to be put into the ark of the bulrushes. Pharaoh's killing babies. That's all demon possession. That's all satanic oppression, trying to kill the seed. It's all the serpent seeking the seed. This is what Revelation 12 is. Go back and watch our Revelation 12. Revelation 12 is all about Israel's about to bring forth a child, and the dragon is sitting there ready to devour the child before it's born. This is the story of the Bible. It's the whole point of the Bible. If you look at verse 7 in Job 2:7, it says, so Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord. Now look at this. We're in the same sentence. So he goes forth from the presence of the Lord and smote Job. Doesn't sound like there's a lot of traveling there. Sounds like he walked out of a building on the earth. Same sentence. Doesn't say anything about traveling back to earth or he left heaven. This is all preconceived ideas read into the text. You have to take an outside thought and put it into the text. As I've already displayed, according to the flow of the author's thought, nobody would dispute, I don't believe, that Job 1:1-5 is on the earth, and Job 1:7 and 8 are on the earth, and everything else. And 6 somehow is in heaven. That's not in the text. And I don't think anybody would dispute that Job is on the earth at the end of verse 7. So you have a huge trek here for a spiritual being that, as far as we know, can't instantaneously appear somewhere. He's limited. So he left the presence of the Lord and he smote Job in the same sentence. Sounds like he walked out the back door and went and found Job.
Yeah.
So I think our at least I would say this, those that are listening to this that are shaking their heads saying you're absolutely wrong, I would just say this, to be fair to my position, you have to agree that it's plausible that the definition that we already read in Romans and that Jesus gave us in John, Romans 8:14, that if you're led of the Spirit of God, you are a son of God. These are the sons of God. Those that are led by the Spirit of God are the sons of God. If I use that definition, you have to agree with me that it does work. It is possible for people that are in covenant with God to go in his presence on earth. And for Satan to be on the earth, he said that's where he was. I have way more contextual proof on my side for this position than to pluck out Job 1:6 out of its context, say, well, that part's in 7. Or Job 2:7a is in heaven, but Job 2:7b is on earth. I'm not doing that. I'm saying it's all on earth. So you have to, even those that are disagreeing with me would have to agree that it's at least plausible. And I think actually, according to the context and just biblical data, I think it's overwhelming in this favor.
Yeah.
Let's go to the next place that it's used in Job chapter 38. Now, it must be noted that Job chapter 38 is beginning this section where God is speaking to Job. And this, now all of Job, by the way, I should have said this at the beginning, Job is poetry. Job is considered poetry as far as genre. If you don't know what genre you're reading, you have a disconnect between yourself and the author. A lack of understanding genre you will not understand the point of the author. We are reading poetry. And so in poetry, it says in Job chapter 38, let's go ahead and read it because this is all important. The Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, who is this that darkeneth counsel by words without knowledge? What he's saying is, Job, you're going to bring a shadow on my counsel, and you're doing this with words, and you have no idea what you're talking about. Words without knowledge. Darken my counsel with words without knowledge. So he says this, okay, let's play a little game, Job. You think it's okay for you to darken my counsel with words without knowledge? Okay, do this. Why don't you pull your pants up there, big boy? I got some questions for you. Verse 3, he says, gird up now thy loins like a man. I will demand of thee an answer, and answer thou me. Verse 4. So he says this, where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare if thou hast an understanding. The very first thing he goes to, Jimmy, is the foundations of the earth. This is very important for our study. Very first thing he does, he goes timeline-wise to the beginning of the foundations of the earth. He says, now I have some questions about the foundation of the earth. Verse 5, who hath laid the measures thereof? If thou knowest, who has stretched the line upon it? Now, these are both questions about the foundation of the earth. Who stretched a line? Who has the plumb line? Who made sure it was straight? Tell me, how does this practically work out? What's the construction of the foundation of the earth? Then he says this in verse number 6. Where upon the foundations thereof fastened? Or, here's one more question about the foundation of the earth. He says, who laid the cornerstone thereof? Cornerstone, that sounds familiar. What's the theming in the Bible on cornerstone? Well, that's Jesus. I think we all understand that. Let's go to Matthew chapter 21. Jimmy, if you could read, if you have that handy. Matthew 21, verse 42. Jesus is quoting Psalm 118, verses 21 through 23 in this passage. That's important because, and you know this, Jimmy, because we just talked about this on Sunday at church, but Jesus is quoting Psalm 118 because it's the last of the Hallel Psalms, the praise Psalms, that section from 113 to 118. And they did that as they were working their way up to Passover. So this is the last section of Psalm 118, getting ready for Passover. In preparation for that, Jesus quotes it about himself getting ready for Passover. Here's what he says.
Jesus saith unto them, did ye never read in the scriptures, the stone which the builders rejected, the same is become the head of the corner? This is the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes.
So is it possible, if our theming is correct here, that God is questioning Job on the foundations of the earth and the central figure of the creation of the world, Jesus Christ, that's exactly what he's doing. Job, you don't understand. You've darkened my counsel without knowledge. Job, I got a question for you. What is the big deal of the cornerstone that I laid from the foundations of the earth? Now, some might be listening to this saying, wait a second, Ken. Jesus was born in Bethlehem about 3 BC, thanks to some people who got the calendar wrong on Herod's death. How could we be talking about Jesus if we're talking about the foundation of the world? Now let's read verse 7, the verse in question, and I'll answer that question. When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy. By the way, sons of God shouting for joy based on the foundation of the earth doesn't really sound like fallen angels to me. But this is now the ET view switches and says, oh, no. These are pre-fallen angels. These are good angels. Well, then what's the distinction with the Ben Elohim? If it means something and you can't even go to the Greek with it, it can mean either fallen or unfallen. It can mean either demons from the pit of hell, or it can mean perfectly fine angels worshiping God. The same Hebrew phrase means either. Doesn't really sound like a contextual case they're making. Kind of sounds like an outside theory they're imposing on the text. Because here, the sons of God are clearly not fallen because they're worshiping the Lord, because the cornerstone was laid on the foundation of the earth. Now, let's try this on for size. This is clearly not a fallen angel. So they have to switch hats and go, oh, no. This is pre-fallen. These are good angels. Okay, well, that already is not consistent. But let's see if what I'm saying is consistent. Is it possible that the sons of God here could be the people of God in covenant with him? Well, it says here that when the foundation of the earth was made, there was a cornerstone involved, and the sons of God shouted for joy because of it. Could this really mean people that are humans in covenant with God? Remember, this is poetry. Why don't we let the New Testament interpret this? Jimmy, if you would, let's go to the book of Revelation in chapter 13 and verse 8.
And all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him, whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world.
Whoa. When was Jesus killed?
Before the foundation of the world?
What? So I thought Jesus was killed on Golgotha in AD 30.
Me too.
But that right there is saying that those that don't worship the beast or his image, but are found written in the Lamb's book of life, are worshiping a lamb that was slain from the foundations of the world. How does that make any sense? God's plan for redemption was in place before the foundations of the world. And in Job chapter 38, he's questioning Job about that. And Job doesn't have a clue what he's talking about. And so in poetry, the sons of God in poetic language are worshiping God when they see the crucifixion and resurrection of the chief cornerstone. That's us in heaven. We weren't born yet. That's God's point. Job doesn't even understand it. And so the writer of John from Patmos is saying that the Lamb of God was slain before the foundations of the world. And it's the people that are in the Lamb's book of life that will worship the Lamb slain from the foundations of the world. Not on Golgotha in AD 30 from the hand of the Romans. This has been the plan of God since creation.
Well, let me ask you something. Why does that Revelation scripture say whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb? What am I missing there?
Go back and look at the beginning of chapter 13, because it's talking about the damnation of those that are worshiping the beast in his image.
Okay.
So you have two people groups talked about in Revelation 13. Those that are worshiping the beast in his image, and those that are not worshiping, and they're written in the Lamb's book of life. So covenant, not covenant. Okay. Godly, ungodly. So if you read it again, you'll know, and I know that's a little confusing. I debated whether to say that context, but since you asked it, then if you read the verse again, you'll see that there are people that are worshiping the beast, and there's people who are refusing to worship, and those are the ones that are in the Lamb's book of life. which was the lamb slain from the foundations of the world.
Okay.
Does that make more sense? Looking at it.
I knew there was a
Yeah.
context thing. I was just this one verse pulled out by itself,
and doesn't that really prove our study tonight? One verse pulled out is pretty confusing. Yeah. So that's what I think that's what I think Job 38 is talking about. If you go from verse 1 through verse 7, and by the way, if you keep on going, you see all the poetry. Look at verse 8. Who shut up the sea with doors? The sea doesn't have doors. I would like for somebody to show me the door that God put on the sea. And by the way, when that door breaks forth as if it issue out of the womb, I made the cloud like a garment thereof, thickness of swaddling for it. I break it up for my decreed place and set bars and doors. I would love for somebody to show me bars and doors on the ocean. This is poetry. The clouds are like simile garments. The genre here is poetry. You should be aware, you should be very, very weary of anybody, cautious of anybody who takes poetry and makes it doctrine. Remember what we want to do. Interpret the unclear with the clear. What's the clear? To them gave he power to become the sons of God. If you're led of the Spirit of God, you are the sons of God. Clear. This is unclear. This is poetry.
Well, maybe the writer, he goes in and out of poetry and literal stuff.
Well, there's always an element to that where you're saying you're saying some literal, but when the text itself lends to a figure of speech like a simile, if I say I'm hungry as a bear, the word as is a simile. So I may be saying I'm literally hungry, but I'm using a figurative term to use a simile, which is a very hyperbolic, another figure of speech. I'm exaggerating my hunger, comparing it to a bear. So that's how the Bible uses this. God literally made the world, and it literally is amazing, and Job literally doesn't understand it. And I'm going to say it in very figurative, poetic ways. So figures of speech are not throwaways. You just have to understand them in the context as the author intended them.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, let's get to a couple other things before we close out this one. Another thing that the ET view violates is a very simple principle, and I call it the after their kind principle. When God made the world, he made everything with its DNA or its seed, and this is very important. They're made after their kind. You've never seen an orange grow on an apple tree, and you've never seen a dog give birth to a skateboard. You've never seen something bring forth not after its kind. The ET view violates this. They're saying that something that was different than a human mated with and produced something non-human. That's not bringing forth after its kind. The women on the earth would have brought forth something not after their own kind. That's a violation of the biblical principle of after their kind. So let's just read a couple of these. I think people understand what I'm saying. But Genesis 1:21 and 25.
And God created great whales and every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly, after their kind, and every winged fowl after his kind. And God saw that it was good. And verse 25, and God made the beasts of the earth after his kind, and cattle after their kind, and everything that creepeth upon the earth after his kind. And God saw that it was good.
And then now we get to Adam, because that didn't talk about people yet. Talk about trees, whales, birds. But let's talk about Adam. What kind was Adam? He wasn't an animal kind. He wasn't an herb kind. He wasn't a vegetation kind. What kind is Adam? Let's look at Genesis 1:26 and 27.
And God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him, male and female created he them.
So the template for Adam was God. We're made in his image. And then what do we read? After our likeness. And what do we read in Genesis 6? We read people producing people. Even their verse that they hang all their weight on. Verse 4. Well, sons of God, daughters of men, what did they produce? Men. So saying it's something different than that violates this after their kind principle when you bring in an extraterrestrial idea with a half-breed.
Mm-hmm.
It actually, I will tell you this, Jimmy, the reason I wanted to do this video is not because I want to prove anybody wrong. That's not my motivation. My only motivation for this is those that I have seen that are pushing the ET view, it's actually messing with the gospel. Jesus came to redeem people because of their own sin. The flood happened because of the wickedness of man. Those are violated with the ET view. You know, in politics today, we don't have undercover Nephilim going on in Washington, D.C. I'm not saying there's not satanic influence. What I'm saying is you have people who are wicked. And, you know, you don't have to look behind somebody's eyes and wonder if they're Nephilim. I think we'll close this video, Jimmy, if it's okay with you, by just looking at the word itself, giants, because I think this is important.
Yeah.
Because after all is said and done, I think I've given more than enough biblical evidence. And by the way, we're not even close to done with this study. We'll do another video where we're going to go into Jude. We're going to go into 2 Peter. We're going to go into other topics of this because we have the Rephidim. We have other mentions of they're just like I kind of gave away some of it when I talked about 10 were bad and 2 were good. We're taking the unfaithful witnesses' word for it and not Joshua and Caleb's. It's just, I can't believe when I hear people defending this view from the 10's point of view and not the 2's point of view. It literally, I'm like, you're cutting your own knees off here. It's really mind-numbing.
I just always viewed that as, well, Caleb and Joshua just knew that it didn't matter how big they were, that God was going to cut them down anyway.
Well, you have Eeyore. We've all been around Eeyore. And you don't really want to listen to your Eeyore friend too much because you're not going to want to go on in life. Eeyore sees the worst of everything, and they're defeated by everything. You can't really take what they say too seriously because Eeyore's already defeated. And we are like grasshoppers, by the way. Again, well, let me just ask you. Let's go through this real quick. We are like, it doesn't, we should look it up. Can we look that up real quick on the fly?
Yeah.
Okay, because I believe there's a simile in there.
Well, well, you've already said it.
Well, I think, but I want to be right about it because I believe that there's a simile in there. So this is Joshua and Caleb, right? So do you have can we look up where the reference is?
And there we saw the giants, the sons of Anak, which come of the giants, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight.
Okay, let's play a little game here. The game is, can you find the simile? What's the simile in that verse? And we were in our own sight
as.
Simile.
Yeah, as.
That means they weren't literally like grasshoppers in their sight. It's not a comparison saying, folks, if you look at a grasshopper and you look at a man, that's the difference between us and them.
That's what I thought all these years.
It says we are as grasshoppers. And so we were in their sight. They're exaggerating for emphasis to say they're bigger than us.
How would it needed to have been worded to be actual? We are. There's no way to even say that, though, is there?
You could say that they are a certain amount of cubits. Yeah. When we get to the king, remember there's a king. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. There's a giant king. I believe he's somewhere around Goliath's height. We know his bed was about 13 feet long, and it actually gives his cubits. We could give cubits like we did for Goliath.
Yeah.
But they didn't do that. They just made a huge deliberate exaggeration. And by the way, we'll get into this in the next video because I don't want to stray too far. I just want to show there's a simile there. So you have 10 ungodly people that know they're going to be defeated, and they use a simile for exaggeration. This is not for us to get out a calculator and say, okay, a grasshopper is a half inch, a man is 6 feet. So, oh, wow, this is like them being... But we'll do this in the next video. We'll get into this stuff more. Okay. But by the way, you know what I never hear anybody talk about that's the proponent of the ET version is the actual math that you do to see how tall somebody would be according to First Enoch. I've done the math on it, and we're not talking about people that are 20 feet tall. It's just people that are 2 miles tall. It talks about L's. We'll get into L's in a little bit. And there's a discrepancy on whether it's this or 10 times this. But my friends, look up and see how long an L is, and look at first Enoch and see how many L's these giants were. It's like 2 miles. It's
Wow.
not 15 feet. So we're in total Jewish mythology. We'll get into the Jewish mythology in the next verse. Okay, so after their kind. Okay, so in Genesis chapter 6, in verse number 4, we're almost through. Genesis 6:4, we get to this word giants. This is interesting. This is interesting. We know what who the Rephidim are. Rephidim is a Hebrew word. So when we get to the Rephidim, it's a Hebrew word that's transliterated into English. In other words, when the King James translators got to Rephidim, they said, you know what? That's somebody's name, and we're just going to leave it as Rephidim. That's how you say it in Hebrew. That's how you say it in English. That's their name. But for some reason, Jimmy, they got to this group right here in Genesis 6:4. And by the way that you would say this in Hebrew is something like Nephil. The Nephil, if people want to do a little study on this, it's in the Strongs, it's H5303. Look up H5303. You'll see that it is the word Nephil. Now, Jimmy, here's why that's fascinating. The word Nephil means fallen one. It's from the root that just means to fall, the fallen ones.
See, there's those fallen angels.
Yeah, well, that's how they would use that. But the thing is, you have those that are in covenant with God, and you have those that are in Adam. Adam fell in the garden.
Yeah.
It's very basic, very, very basic Bible stuff. So in the Hebrew, so let's go back to this. So you have the Nephil, and that's where we get Nephilim from. Why did the King James translators come to a similar thing with Rephidim and other similar names? And they just translate the names. But here they went with giants. Why did they do that?
I don't know.
Well, here's why. Because when the King James translators got here, they also looked at the Septuagint. The Septuagint is the Greek translation. We've already mentioned it, 250 BC, the Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures. They pulled this word, gigantes. Gigantes is the Greek word in the Septuagint for giants. They pulled gigantes out, and they just simply gave it an English name, giants. They pulled it from gigantes. Who are the gigantes? That's the question. Who are they? Why did the Septuagint translators 250 years before Christ take Nephil and say gigantes? My friends, this is very important. Gigantes is Greek mythology. And they are known for being very good fighters. They're very good fighters, and they're known for being tough and strong. They're known for being bullies. I'm talking about the gigantes in Greek mythology. And so as the translators of the Septuagint were coming through Genesis 6, and they were seeing these mighty men that were produced, and they had a negative connotation. The wickedness of man was only evil continually, and God brought the flood. They were trying to communicate that these were bullies, that they were good at fighting, that they were strong. And so they said, the Nephil are like the gigantes. And so they put the word gigantes there. The King James translators pick up on this, and they don't use the Hebrew word. They use the Greek word and say, and there were giants in the earth in those days. There were gigantes in the earth in those days. They were the fallen ones, the Nephil.
Well, and they follow that up with men of renown, right?
Sure.
So as you were just saying all that, I'm thinking, wait a minute, the way we talk today, if somebody's really famous, we might say they're huge.
They're big, yeah.
But it doesn't mean they're tall as the cedars of Lebanon. So, and they're famous. They're huge.
Yeah.
So that's kind of probably what was going on.
They're just known for being very good fighters and very, very much of a bully. And so I gave you a picture a little bit earlier. I don't think Wikipedia is the greatest academic source in the world. But Jimmy, if you could put on the screen at this time, there's a picture I want to show folks. And go ahead and look at this. This is a screenshot of Wikipedia, and you look at this, and you can do this. Go ahead and you Google this, and just Google gigantes, which is Gigantes, and you'll see a Wikipedia page. Go ahead and pull that up, and you'll see this. I have it as a screenshot right here, and this is the gigantes. That's the exact word used. If you go ahead and look at Blue Letter Bible or anything that you look up for your lexicon, look at Genesis 6:4. You'll see Nephil as the Hebrew, but go ahead and look at the LXX and bring up the Greek translation of the Septuagint, and you will find the Greek Septuagint uses gigantes. Now, this is what we're talking about in Greek mythology. Ironically, after all that we've said in this video, the word giants from gigantes in Greek mythology, and you'll see it right there, right in front of you, they are known for fighting. They are known for being bullies, and it says it right there, but they are not it doesn't necessarily mean that they're tall, necessarily. Weird. Because when I think of Andre the Giant, I think of he's tall. Now, the gigantes that they're talking about in Greek mythology could have been tall. It doesn't preclude them from being tall or huge. It could have been part of their makeup, but not necessarily part of their makeup. They're mostly known for being good fighters and bullies and ungodly and that sort of thing, taking what they want, more like pirates, you know. But just ironic, isn't it ironic after all this talk? It's ironic, isn't it, that in Greek mythology, the gigantes aren't even necessarily known for being tall. They could have been, but that wasn't the characteristic they're most known for. They're most known for being good fighters, which is exactly what exactly what Genesis 6 says. They're men of renown. They're mighty warriors. That's why the Septuagint translators use the word gigantes, and that's why the King James put in their giants. We think of giants as only one thing, huge, but that's not the meaning that we have in gigantes. So ironically, after all this study, chapter 6 and verse 4 says, after these two entities got together, they produced men. And even at that, gigantes doesn't even necessarily mean big. I mean, it's just a house of cards. It's really bad. It's really, really bad teaching. I would just say this, Jimmy, that it is unnecessary. I forget unbiblical. I think it's unbiblical too. I think it's actually close to heretical, because you actually have Jesus's death, burial, and resurrection in play here. And you have the expressed purpose of the flood is being completely ignored here and lied about. But this is an unnecessary teaching. This is mythology. It's not in the text. It's a thought from outside of it. So I'm going to recap and finish this video this way. Jimmy, I would like to go ahead and say this, that those that believe in the ET view, in order to believe in the ET view, I believe you have to violate the following 11, and I'm going to add one for extra measure at the end, but I'll say you have to violate 11 biblical principles we've outlined in this video. Number one, I think for those that believe in the ET view, have to violate, number one, the flow of thought by the author. We talked about from Genesis 1 through 5, especially hitting chapter 3, verse 15, that there's a separation between these two lines. It was men's problem in chapter 6. We have the lines being talked about in 5. We have a man, Eve got a man from the Lord in Genesis 4:1, and in Genesis 4, was it 25:26? He said, I got a son from the Lord. The author's flow of thought is totally ignored and violated with the ET view, completely thrown out the window. Number two, we have the man and son relationship I just mentioned in Genesis 4, totally violated, totally ignored. Like, it doesn't even matter that Cain's called man, doesn't matter that Seth is called son. It's just like, well, that means absolutely nothing. We're not going to use that knowledge to go forward in the story. We're just going to ignore it. Number three, the reason for the flood. The Bible expressly tells us the purpose of the flood was the wickedness of man. It's not because of an ET. It's the wickedness of man. Number four, the Bible states clearly in Genesis 6:4, it states that the Nephilim were men. It's their best verse. It's their best verse. And it actually says in the verse, they produced men. I don't know. The fifth biblical principle that you have to violate to get to this is the idea of the principle of after their kind. Everything brings forth after their kind. It violates that principle. This is something that's of another kind, mating with something of another kind and producing a third kind, a half-breed. We don't see that in the Bible. The Bible says that God made his creation to bring forth after its kind. This violates that principle. It also violates the context of Job 1, 2, and 38, referring to the people of God in covenant with him. It also violates that Jesus says that the angels do not marry nor give into marriage. The eighth biblical principle it violates is the writer of Hebrews stated that God did not say at any time that any of the angels were a son of his. He says he didn't say it at any time. That's why Jesus is more superior than the angels, by the way. He's more superior because of a relationship. Jesus is the Son of God. It's a relationship he has with God. And it's through the power of Jesus that we are given the ability to become sons of God. You say, do those who believe in the ET view really want to tell me that the demons that got kicked out of heaven, that belong in the pit of hell, that are evil of evils, God looks at them and says, there's my sons? Do they look up at heaven and say, oh, Father, we hate you? That's their relationship still? Father and son? Getting close to blasphemy, in my opinion. When you think of it that way, we're really close to blasphemy. I don't know what the actual definition of blasphemy is, but when you're calling something in the pit of hell God's son, that's a problem biblically. To me, that's a problem. The ninth principle you have to violate to get to the ET view is that Paul said the sons of God are those who are led by the Spirit of God. Are the fallen angels those that are led by the Spirit of God? Oh, Ken, you can't use the New Testament to interpret the Old. Yeah, I can. I'm a Bible-believing Christian. That's how I know who the Lamb of God is. The 10th biblical principle you violate with the ET view is that Jesus said he came to give men the power to become the sons of God. And if somebody wants to say, oh, well, that's the New Testament, remember, Jesus was born in the Old Covenant. So technically speaking, the New Covenant doesn't start until the upper room. So yes, it might say New Testament on your Bible, but that doesn't actually become New Testament economy until the upper room. Jesus was born in the Old Covenant. And he said, in his words, that he came to give men the power to become the sons of God. Is he talking about giving them power to become fallen angels? Nope. He meant for them to become in covenant with him, in a relationship with him and the Father. The 11th biblical principle you have to violate to believe in the ET view is the entire biblical narrative is a fulfillment of Genesis 3:15. It's about a division between the godly and the ungodly line to bring about the Messiah. That's the whole point. That's the whole point of the genealogies. It's the whole point of the record of the seeds. That's what Paul was saying in Genesis chapter 3. And that seed, he says, it is not many seeds, but as to one seed. He's very clear on this issue that the seed is Jesus. And I'll throw in a bonus one because it's extra biblical, meaning outside of the Bible. And that is just the plain definition of the gigantes, the Greek word that the King James translators were using when they said giants. It doesn't even necessarily mean size. It mostly means good fighters, which is actually in the text, that they are mighty men of renown. That's actually in the text, and that's the primary usage of gigantes. So in our next video, we're going to touch on, I think this needs to be talked about, Jimmy, if you're okay with this. In our next video, I'd like to talk about why is the ET view dangerous, and why does it need to be corrected? Because believe it or not, Jewish mythology was big business in the intertestamental period. Between the books of Malachi and Matthew, there's 400 years, and the Jewish people were like, where's this Messiah? And they got no answers. And the Greeks were taking over the world. Alexander the Great conquered the world, and the world was Hellenized, means it was Greekified. I always say that. It was made to be like Greek. It was Hellenized. And all of a sudden, those that are waiting for their Messiah, they're stuck with this antiquated book about Abraham and the serpent and this garden. Oh man, the Greeks are onto mathematics and they're onto science and they're doing all this Greek mythology and it's just all this wonderful stuff. And those that are out of covenant with God, they take the Jewish scriptures and they mix it with Greek mythology. That happened in between the testamental period. Did you know that Paul addresses this? Did you know that Jesus addresses this? They fight against these ungodly Jewish people that mix the Hebrew scriptures with Greek mythology, coming up with Jewish mythology. And they talk about it in the New Testament. In our next video, we will point out where there is a huge warning to stand up against people that mix the Jewish scriptures with Greek mythology. That's exactly what First Enoch is. And I'll show why it says they're 2 miles tall in that. That's an embarrassing fact for them. We'll go into all of that in our next video, and why I think this ET view needs to be corrected, and why I believe it's actually dangerous when we talk about the gospel, that Jesus came to save people from their sin, because men were wicked and need a savior. Jimmy, as we close this video, I just really want to take a moment, and I know I get super passionate about theology. I can get really excited about study. I think as we all can, I think if you put time into it. I just want to make sure I end by saying this. I do not in any way want this video to come across as mocking those who have a different view, or that I'm making fun of those who have come to a different conclusion. In anything that I've said in this video, I want it to come across with love and humility, that I do believe that what we presented is the biblical view, but that I, in no way, and I know there's going to be people watching this that probably disagree if they got this far in the video, that just to know that this is a secondary issue, I guess you could say, an in-house debate, if you can say. And I, those that are watching, I just want to just approach this with some grace and say that, this is something we should be able to talk through and enjoy Bible study. But I in no way want to come across like I'm mocking people, because this is one of those topics people put a lot of time into, and they can have a lot of emotion with it too. So I hope folks can at least see my heart on that. In the times in this video, if you see that I get passionate about something, where I laugh or I'm smiling, it's more me thinking through the position and the people. I love people. And I want people to know that. If I come across that way, it's only because I get excited about the topic. But I just wanted to make sure people understood my heart on that.